He told me he didn't need me anymore, and instead of a courthouse, he drove me out into the desert, leaned over and said, "It's almost over. Check your pocket." If you've ever felt that cold drop in your stomach when love suddenly turns on you, please tap like or leave a kind comment. Your support truly helps me keep sharing these stories, and it means more than you know. I'm Aaliyah. I'm 29 years old, and I never thought my marriage would unravel in such a quiet, cruel way. I used to believe marriage was about small acts of love, the daily routines that showed we were in this together, and with Marcus, I thought I had that. We started young, building a life from scratch, dreaming about owning a home, raising kids, and traveling once we got ahead. I worked hard to keep things steady, making sure bills were paid, our place stayed warm and welcoming, and that the love between us felt safe. But over time, Marcus stopped talking in we and started speaking in I, as if his plans no longer needed room for me, and that shift was like a crack spreading across glass. Invisible at first, but impossible to ignore once it grew. At first, I excused it as stress or maybe ambition, telling myself he just needed space. But stress doesn't explain secret bank withdrawals, late nights with no explanation, and the new passwords he refused to share. He shut me out of decisions, brushed off my questions, and acted as if my presence was optional. The man who once leaned on me now treated me like I was in the way. I kept carrying the weight of our household because that's what good wives do. But inside, I was starting to feel invisible, like a guest in my own marriage. Family gatherings made it even clearer. Marcus stood on the sidelines glued to his phone, laughing at messages he wouldn't show me while I sat smiling through conversations I barely heard. He saved his charm for strangers and gave me silence at home, and I kept pretending nothing was wrong because I didn't want to be the woman with a broken marriage. But the day he looked at me without flinching and said he didn't need me anymore, it wasn't anger in his voice. It was calm. And that calm cut deeper than rage. In that moment, I realized the life I was protecting was already gone, and silence would no longer be my shield. It would become my strategy. The morning Marcus told me we were driving to the courthouse, I forced myself to move slow, steady, like this was just another chore we had to cross off the list. I slipped into a simple dress, tied my hair back, and told myself that if this was the end, at least it would be written down on paper and stamped with a seal. I sat in the passenger seat clutching my purse like a lifeline, pretending not to notice that my stomach was tying itself in knots. The courthouse was supposed to be 10 minutes from our place, but 10 minutes stretched into 20, then 30. And when I glanced out the window, the buildings had started to vanish behind us like they were being erased. He wasn't driving me toward resolution. He was driving me toward emptiness. The further we went, the quieter it got inside the car. The radio hummed a soft static. Marcus tapped the steering wheel with one finger, and I sat there calculating every turn. I saw the familiar exit signs slide by. Downtown, the courthouse, the main streets. But he kept going, his face blank, his mouth locked shut. Instead of city blocks, I saw dust swirling, gas stations shrinking in the rear view, and long stretches of road that looked like they were built for bad decisions. My heart thumped like a drum at a parade no one asked for, and I gripped my purse so tight my knuckles looked chalk white. I didn't ask where we were going, because sometimes silence is smarter than begging for answers you already know you don't want. Finally, the concrete gave way to gravel, and the car rattled like it was protesting too. I looked out and saw nothing but desert, endless and flat, with heat waves rising off the ground like the air itself was melting. Marcus's hand stayed locked on the wheel, his jaw set in that calm way men get when they've already rehearsed their lines. The whole scene felt surreal, like I was in one of those cheap crime shows I usually laugh at while folding laundry. Only this wasn't TV. This was me in the middle of nowhere sitting next to a man I used to trust with my life, realizing he might be the one trying to take it. And all I could think was, Lord, if this is how it ends, I hope at least I'm wearing good shoes. He stopped the car abruptly, the tires coughing up dust, and cut the engine. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. He turned toward me slowly, leaned back in his seat like he had all the time in the world, and said it was almost over. Almost over. Just like that. Then, as if this was the punchline to some joke only he thought was funny, he told me to check my pocket. My fingers froze for a second before moving, and when I reached inside, I pulled out a folded piece of paper with a small key taped to it. The note was creased and sweaty in my hand, the key sharp enough to dig into my skin. Marcus studied my face the way a gambler watches dice roll, waiting to see panic, waiting for me to break. But I've learned something about myself. Fear doesn't look good on me, so I don't wear it. I kept my expression flat, even though inside my heart was racing like a teenager sneaking back home after curfew. I didn't know what that key opened, but I knew it wasn't anything that would lead me back to safety. The desert around us was wide open, blazing hot, and yet I had never felt more trapped. And still, a small part of me thought, if this fool drags me out here and leaves me, at least my mama will finally admit I was right about him. Sometimes humor is the only thread keeping you from unraveling. A week before Marcus took me on that desert detour, I had already noticed things that didn't add up. It started small, like a line on our bank statement marked storage rental, even though we didn't have one. At first, I thought maybe he was hiding birthday gifts or something harmless, but then another charge popped up, then another, all tied to places I didn't recognize. When I asked him, Marcus gave me that tight smile he reserved for strangers, the one that said, "Don't bother me." My instincts told me to let it slide on the outside, but on the inside, I started taking notes. I might be 29, but I'm not naive. And if there's one thing I learned early, it's that people always leave a trail when they think no one's watching. That trail got clearer when I saw a Venmo notification pop up on our shared tablet. Some woman had sent Marcus money twice and called him babe in the memo line like she was ordering takeout. I screenshotted it so fast I nearly sprained my finger, and in that moment I decided to build my own folder of truth. I titled it Winter Coats because Marcus never cared about clothes enough to snoop there. Inside that folder, I tucked away screenshots, bank statements, and anything else that smelled like betrayal. I even printed copies at work and slipped them into a manila envelope I kept hidden in my tote. It was quiet insurance, a kind of shield I prayed I'd never have to use, but part of me knew it might save me one day. I started looking at his insurance obsession differently too. Marcus had insisted we keep a high-value life insurance policy, the kind that doubles for accidents. Back then, I thought he was just being practical, but after finding those payments and messages, my stomach told me otherwise. That policy wasn't for peace of mind. It was leverage. Suddenly, the desert trip and that key in my pocket felt connected, like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to finish. My mama always said, intuition is just God whispering in your ear, and I heard that whisper loud and clear, so I prepared. I bought a small recorder and clipped it inside my bra, telling myself it was just in case. I slipped an AirTag into the lining of my tote, because if Marcus thought he could control the story, I was going to make sure there was another version. I wasn't planning to fight him head-on. I was planning to listen, to collect, to stay quiet until I had enough to flip the script. People underestimate quiet women. They think silence means weakness, when really it's patience, waiting for the right moment. And I was ready to wait. Once I understood Marcus wasn't just drifting away, but plotting something bigger, I knew I couldn't afford to sit still anymore. I built my plan the way I build grocery lists, carefully, neatly, with no wasted lines. I opened a new bank account under my own name, something small to start, just enough to catch my paycheck and keep me steady if things went south. I quietly paid the next month's bills ahead of time so he couldn't threaten me with the lights or water being cut off. I moved a few of my most important things, family photos, papers, jewelry that meant more sentiment than money, into a box labeled taxes and stored it in my cousin Jasmine's garage. Marcus never asked about taxes unless they came with a refund, so I knew it was safe there. Next, I scheduled a free consultation with a divorce attorney, Ms. Robinson, who looked me straight in the eye with that "don't play with me" energy and told me exactly what I needed to do. I left her office with a checklist that felt like armor. I also started keeping a diary of Marcus's behavior, not for myself, but for the courts if it ever came to that. Every late night, every strange withdrawal, every offhand remark went down in ink. I may not have been loud, but I was thorough, and thorough women are dangerous when crossed. At home, I practiced stillness like it was a sport. Marcus studied me sometimes, probably wondering why I wasn't crying, yelling, or begging. But I learned to keep my face calm, my eyes steady, and my voice level. Men like him confuse quiet with clueless, and I let him. What he didn't see was that my recorder was charged, my folder of proof was growing, and my tote bag was tagged with more technology than his fancy car. I even started cooking his favorite meals again, not out of love but out of strategy, because nothing makes a guilty man drop his guard faster than thinking he's in control. The night before he drove me into the desert, I laid on my side of the bed staring at the ceiling fan, listening to its blades cut the air slow and steady. Marcus slept like nothing was wrong, like a man confident the game was already won. But what he didn't know was that I wasn't playing defense anymore. I was setting the stage. Every move he thought was clever was already being documented. Every word he spoke out of arrogance was another piece of rope he was handing me, and I planned to let him tie the knot himself. When Marcus stopped the car in the middle of that barren stretch of desert, the heat wrapped around me like a warning. The silence out there was thick, broken only by the creak of the car as the engine cooled. He turned toward me, leaned back, and repeated those words in that flat voice of his. "It's almost over." Then he nodded at my pocket like he was letting me in on a secret I'd never asked to hear. My fingers moved slowly, and when I pulled out the folded note with the small key taped to it, my stomach dropped. The words written inside were short, but they weren't about divorce. They were about a storage unit and a reminder that accidents happen. I felt the desert spin for a second, but I forced my face to stay calm. I knew enough to recognize a threat wrapped in casual delivery. Marcus studied me like he was waiting for tears, panic, maybe even begging. But I gave him nothing, not because I wasn't terrified, but because I understood that men like him feed on fear. I described the heat, the emptiness, the road we took, almost like I was talking out loud to myself, but really I was talking to the small recorder hidden beneath my blouse. Every detail, every word was captured, because if this was the story he wanted to write, then I was making sure there was another version. He started pacing, his shoes kicking up dust, his jaw tight, his eyes darting like he was trying to measure how much I understood. And then, arrogance slipped out of him like water from a cracked glass. He mentioned the policy, the payout, how easy it would be to move on without messy divorce lawyers or settlements. He spoke too much, forgetting that silence was my weapon now, and I let him talk until the desert itself could have been a witness. My heart was racing, but I pressed it down, steady and strong, because every reckless word he gave me was worth more than gold. Standing there in the middle of nowhere, I realized Marcus thought he was writing the ending to my story. But really, he was handing me the beginning of his own downfall. The sun beat down, the key cut into my palm, and I kept my voice even as I asked him small questions, leading him on, making sure his arrogance kept spilling. He thought he was showing me power, but what he was really doing was showing the world who he truly was. And I was making sure the world would hear it. I know some of you listening have been in a place where love turned into something unrecognizable, where the person you trusted most suddenly felt like a stranger in your own home. It's a pain that makes you question yourself, makes you wonder if you missed the signs or if you could have done something different. If this part of my story is hitting close, I want you to know you're not alone. Your voice matters here, and it means the world when you leave a kind word or even just a small heart in the comments. It's not just support for me. It's a light for every woman who comes across this story and needs to feel seen. Every comment, every little bit of engagement is what helps me keep sharing stories like mine. It tells me I'm not just talking into the void, that someone out there is nodding, feeling, and maybe even healing right along with me. When I sit down to tell these stories, it's your voices I think about, your encouragement that keeps me going when the memories feel too heavy. It may seem small, but it carries weight, and I hope you know how deeply I appreciate it. So if you haven't already, take a moment to tap that like button or drop a quick comment. Tell me if you've ever had a moment when someone underestimated your strength, when they thought they had the upper hand, only for you to find your own way through. Sharing those moments builds something powerful. It creates a community where women stand shoulder to shoulder, reminding each other that quiet doesn't mean weak. And if you want to stay with me through the rest of this story, because trust me, the best part is still ahead, go ahead and subscribe. That way you won't miss how the tables turn and how justice has a way of showing up, even in the middle of a desert. Thank you, truly, for being here. Now, let's get back to that storage unit key Marcus thought was his secret weapon. The morning after Marcus took me out into that desert, I woke up with the weight of that small key pressing into my thoughts like a pebble in a shoe. It was too important to ignore, too dangerous to toss aside, and I knew if I didn't follow through, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what he meant when he said it was almost over. I waited until he left for work, grabbed the key from my nightstand, slipped it into my purse, and drove across town to the address printed on the note. The storage facility sat on the edge of the city, rows of dull gray metal doors lined up like soldiers guarding people's secrets. To anyone else, it looked ordinary, but to me, it felt like a crime scene waiting to be uncovered. I parked, took a deep breath, and walked down the row until I found the matching number. My hands trembled as I slid the key into the lock, half expecting something to jump out at me, half praying it wouldn't fit at all. But it turned with ease. The lock clicked open, and the heavy door groaned upward like it had been waiting for me all along. Inside, the air smelled stale, the kind of dusty stillness that clings to forgotten things. But what I found was anything but forgotten. Stacked against the walls were boxes labeled in Marcus's handwriting, with vague words like misc and tools. But the weight of them told me they weren't holding anything simple. I opened one of the boxes, and right there on top was a binder. Neat, precise, color-coded, the kind of organization Marcus never used at home. My heart thudded as I flipped it open, and with each page, my world tilted further. Bank deposits from people I knew, names from our church, even one from a friend of the family, money that didn't belong to us but had clearly passed through Marcus's hands. There were notes about new property and future expenses, written out in bold, but nowhere on those pages was my name or any sign of a life that included me. It was as if he'd taken a pair of scissors and cut me out of the picture, building a brand new future as if I had never existed. And then I saw it. A spare phone plugged into a charger, buzzing every few minutes like a heartbeat. My fingers hovered over it for a moment before I picked it up, the screen lighting up with messages that confirmed everything I had feared. Vanessa, the woman I suspected, filled the phone with texts dripping in flirtation and promises of a life together. Pictures of dinners, little "can't wait to see you" notes, and worse, her excitement about what was coming soon. But the real dagger wasn't Vanessa. It was the messages with someone saved as coach. Their conversations weren't about romance. They were about strategy. Words like timing and payout and clean ending repeated over and over, making my stomach knot. This wasn't just cheating. It was planning, cold and deliberate like I was an obstacle on a checklist. My hands shook, but my mind sharpened. I took photos of every page in the binder, every message on that phone, and emailed them to myself, to Jasmine, and to Ms. Robinson, my attorney, so that even if Marcus found out, the evidence was already safe. I carefully slid the phone into my tote, right where the AirTag was hidden, because I wanted to know what Marcus would do when he realized it was missing. Standing there in the middle of that storage unit, surrounded by boxes full of lies, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't the scared woman he expected. I wasn't the weak partner he thought he could erase. He believed the key was a threat, a reminder that he held power over me. But the truth was, he had just handed me the very proof that would undo him. And for the first time in a long while, I felt stronger than the fear. That weekend, Marcus insisted we show up at a family cookout, acting like everything was normal, like we were just another couple with busy schedules. I played along, sliding into my sundress and sandals, because sometimes the best way to catch a man slipping is to let him think you're not watching. The backyard was buzzing with laughter, kids running under sprinklers, uncles manning the grill, and the smell of ribs hanging thick in the air. Marcus put on his biggest smile, greeting cousins and cracking jokes like he hadn't just threatened me in the desert. But the thing about masks is, the longer you wear them, the easier they are to see through. I stayed close to the aunties, laughing about potato salad recipes and hot flashes, letting them pull me into their chatter while I kept my tote close by. Marcus, on the other hand, moved through the crowd like a man auditioning for Best Husband of the Year. He slapped shoulders, passed out plates, and even kissed me on the cheek too hard when someone pointed a phone our way. That kiss was for the camera, not for me. And when he lifted his glass to make a toast about new beginnings, I almost choked on my lemonade. The nerve of him, standing there with rib sauce on his fingers, talking about fresh starts while I had the evidence of his betrayal zipped up in my bag. The cracks showed when the small talk turned to money. Someone joked about who was going to pay for the next family vacation, and Marcus got tense, snapping quicker than he meant to. His smile faltered for just a second, enough for me to catch it, and the cousins noticed too. He covered it with a laugh, but the moment was there, his mask slipping under the weight of his lies. Later, I saw him on the patio, pacing with his phone, whispering into it like the world might collapse if anyone overheard. His performance was strong, but the stage lights of family always reveal what shadows try to hide. I kept quiet, watching him squirm in small ways, making mental notes of every shift in his face, every slip of his tongue. My aunt leaned over and said, "Baby, you holding up? You look too calm for a woman with all that weight on her." I smiled and told her I was fine, but inside I was sharper than ever. I knew then that Marcus couldn't keep this charade up much longer, and when a liar starts to crack in front of family, you know it's only a matter of time before the whole mask falls to the ground. After the cookout, I decided it was time to move from watching to acting. I still had the spare phone from the storage unit, and in it sat all the messages between Marcus and the man saved as Coach. I knew Marcus's ego wouldn't let him ignore an invitation if he thought it came from one of his partners. So I used his own words, his own tone, and sent a message from that phone arranging a meeting at a small coffee shop across town, the kind of place busy men use when they don't want to be recognized. My cousin Jasmine worked nearby and had a friend in security who agreed to sit close and record. If Marcus thought he was running the game, I was about to show him he was just walking into mine. I arrived early, dressed simple, hair pulled back, sunglasses on, and sat 2 tables away with a book open like I was just another customer passing time. My tote bag rested on the chair beside me, recorder running, AirTag still tucked safely inside. Marcus showed up exactly on time, like a man who believes punctuality makes him professional, not guilty. He walked in wearing confidence like a brand new suit, shook hands with Coach, and ordered his coffee like he owned the place. But once they sat down, the truth started spilling faster than the barista could pour. I listened carefully as they spoke about timelines and clean outcomes, the exact kind of words I knew only made sense in the context of his scheme. Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice, bragging about how things were almost handled and how soon he'd be free to move on. He mentioned Vanessa, he mentioned the policy, and he even outlined how messy divorces could be avoided if the story stayed simple. Every word slid straight onto my recorder, every gesture captured by the quiet lens of the security camera Jasmine's friend had set up. I didn't flinch. I didn't storm over. I ordered a cinnamon roll I didn't even want, sat there sipping my coffee, and let Marcus bury himself with his own arrogance. He thought he was proving control to a partner, But what he was really doing was giving me the final piece of proof I needed. Sitting there, watching him plan my erasure while I calmly collected every detail, I realized the sweetest revenge is letting a liar think he's winning right up until the moment he loses everything. I chose Sunday because in our community, church is more than just worship. It's where reputations live or die. Everyone shows up in their best clothes, carrying their best smiles, but it's also the one place where lies can't hold their shape for long. I put on a soft blue dress that made me feel steady, slipped on flats so I could stand all day if I had to, and walked into Pastor Green's service with Jasmine on my arm. The sanctuary was buzzing, the choir lifting their voices, children running down the aisle with bulletin papers in their hands, and still all I could feel was the weight of what I carried in my tote. I wasn't there to make a scene. I was there to let truth walk the room on its own 2 feet. Marcus arrived dressed sharp, his suit pressed, his tie perfectly knotted, the picture of a man who had it all together. He greeted ushers with that practiced smile, kissed me on the cheek in front of the congregation like a proud husband, and slid into the pew 2 rows behind me as though proximity proved devotion. He clapped on the beat, nodded at the sermon, raised his hands when Pastor Green called for praise, every gesture rehearsed like lines in a play. To anyone who didn't know better, he looked untouchable. But what Marcus didn't realize was that I had already given Ms. Robinson, my attorney, the manila folder stuffed with proof, copies of the binder, screenshots of the Venmo messages, and the audio recording from that coffee shop meeting. The truth wasn't sitting quietly anymore. It was being passed from hand to hand, like an offering plate filled with receipts instead of tithes. It started small, the way whispers always do in church. 2 women near the back fanned themselves while murmuring, their eyes cutting toward Marcus. A cousin leaned close to me and asked if I was all right, her voice gentle but sharp with suspicion. A deacon walked past Marcus and gave him a look so pointed you could have written scripture with it. And when his boss, who occasionally came to service, approached him during fellowship hour, the question wasn't friendly. He asked about life insurance paperwork in a tone that wasn't casual. You could see Marcus's shoulders tense, his smile stiffen, his laugh land flat. Each comment spread faster than any gospel song, burning through his carefully polished image. By the time Pastor Green closed with a final hymn, the sanctuary had shifted. Marcus, who loved being the center of admiration, now sat in a space where admiration had soured into doubt. He gripped his Bible too tight, his hands restless, his gaze flicking from face to face, looking for safety and finding none. I stayed calm, humming along, my voice steady, because I knew I didn't need to call him out myself. The community was already doing the work. He built his reputation on charm, but in the house of God, charm cracks under the weight of truth. And as I walked out that morning, sunlight spilling across the church steps, I felt lighter than I had in months, because Marcus finally realized the spotlight he loved so much had turned into a torch, and it wasn't protecting him anymore. It was burning the mask right off his face. The mediation room wasn't glamorous, just a bland office with gray walls, buzzing fluorescent lights, and a pot of coffee that tasted older than the carpet. But to me, it felt like a courtroom without pews, the place where every truth I had been quietly collecting would finally rise against Marcus. I walked in with Ms. Robinson at my side, her presence solid as steel, and set my tote bag on the table like it was a shield. Marcus came in a few minutes later, polished shoes, pressed suit, fake calm pasted across his face. He sat across from me with the look of a man who thought he still had control, but his eyes kept flicking toward me as if searching for fear. What he didn't realize was that fear had stayed behind in the desert, buried under the dust of that day when he told me to check my pocket. When it was time to present, I didn't say much. Instead, I unzipped my bag and pulled out the binder I had prepared with the kind of neatness Marcus had always underestimated. I slid it across the table, page by page, every sheet screaming louder than any words I could have spoken. There were bank statements showing deposits from names tied to our church and community, money that had passed through his hands under the radar. There were screenshots of the Venmo transfers from Vanessa, with her little babe notes and hearts attached, spelling out betrayal in emojis. There were copies of emails, receipts, and even a note Marcus had scribbled with his own handwriting about moving money before she notices. And then came the phone. I pulled up the messages between him and Coach, and the mediator leaned forward, eyes narrowing as the words came into focus. Timing, payout, clean ending. It was all there, plain and undeniable. Ms. Robinson pressed play on the recorder, and Marcus's voice filled the room, steady and smug, talking about how accidents solve problems, how soon he would be free, how divorce would be too messy. The air in the room shifted. Even the mediator, who had worn the same neutral expression all morning, looked at Marcus with a cold kind of disappointment, the way a teacher looks at a student caught cheating on a test with the answers still in hand. Marcus tried to salvage what he could, his voice climbing higher than usual as he claimed it was all misunderstood. Just talk, just frustration. He waved his hands, tried to charm, tried to act as though the context was missing. But context didn't matter anymore. The binder, the messages, the recordings, they were bigger than charm. Ms. Robinson calmly cut through every excuse with legal precision, reminding him of timelines, pointing to the policy flagged for suspicious activity, and explaining what premeditation looks like when it's spelled out in your own words. Marcus's mask, the one he wore so tightly in public, was slipping faster than he could glue it back on. By the end of the session, the settlement was no longer a negotiation. It was a decision stamped by fact. The house, my accounts, my future, all secured under my name. Marcus's reputation, his pride, and his sense of untouchable control, stripped from him in the space of a few hours. His boss, already notified, would be reviewing his position. His community, already whispering, would not be offering applause anymore. And Vanessa, who once filled his phone with love notes, had already gone quiet when she realized she might be dragged into something bigger than infidelity. When I picked up the pen to sign my name on the final page, my hands didn't tremble. My heart didn't race. I felt calm, steady, almost light. Across from me, Marcus sat hunched over, his suit suddenly looking too big for the man inside it. I stood, tucked the binder back into my tote, and walked out without looking back. In that moment, I knew this wasn't just about divorce, betrayal, or even revenge. This was about balance. About a quiet woman who had been underestimated learning to fight in her own way, with proof instead of noise, with patience instead of panic. Marcus had given me every weapon I needed. I had only to carry them to the table. And when I did, it wasn't me who was dismantled. It was him. When the dust finally settled and the last paper was signed, I didn't walk out of that chapter of my life as a broken woman. I walked out lighter, steadier, freer. Like someone who had been carrying a weight so long, she forgot what her own spine felt like standing tall. The silence in the house was different now. It wasn't the cold silence Marcus used to wrap around me like punishment. It was the kind of silence that made space for peace. On my first night alone, I rearranged the furniture in the living room, dragging the couch to a new corner and moving the old coffee table out to the curb, because I wanted the room to breathe differently, to reflect a home that finally belonged only to me. I bought a lamp with a soft golden glow and set it in the corner where the shadows used to gather. And when I turned it on, it felt like I was turning on a piece of myself I thought had gone dim. I made a small pot of gumbo just for me, not a giant pot for leftovers that he would forget to eat, and I smiled at the sound of my own spoon stirring in peace. The days that followed were full of small, deliberate victories. I paid every bill in my own name, with money from my own account, and felt a pride that was deeper than any check Marcus ever signed. I replaced the linens on the bed, not because they were worn, but because I wanted a fresh start in every corner of my life. I hung new curtains, not fancy ones, just light ones that let in more sun, and when the breeze pushed them gently, I thought about how even air felt kinder without him. The house became a reflection of freedom, brighter, lighter, and warmer than it had been in years. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It crept in during these quiet moments, like when I realized I was sleeping through the night without waking up to listen for footsteps or excuses that never added up. Slowly, I began to step back into the world with a different kind of energy. I joined a walking group in the neighborhood, made up of women who carried their own stories, women who laughed so loudly it felt like therapy on the sidewalk. We traded recipes, shared life lessons, and teased each other with humor only women who had lived and survived could understand. One woman told me to buy myself flowers every Friday, whether or not anyone else thought I deserved them, and I took her advice. I started filling my table with fresh bouquets, sunflowers, roses, lilies, little bursts of life that reminded me that love didn't need to come from someone else's wallet or approval. It could come from my own two hands. I also began saving for a weekend by the ocean. Nothing extravagant, just a simple trip where I could sit by the waves and hear the sound of something steady, something that had been moving long before Marcus and would keep moving long after. Humor became my secret weapon, the kind of healing you can't bottle. I joke now with Jasmine and the other girls that if a man ever tells me to check my pocket again, he better be handing me diamond studs, a car key, or at least a gift card with no expiration date. We laugh until our stomachs hurt, because laughter softens the scars and turns pain into stories you can carry without crying. Sometimes I even catch myself chuckling alone, remembering Marcus pacing under that desert sun, trying so hard to look powerful, sweating through his shirt while talking about accidents and timelines. He thought he was clever, but in reality, he looked like a man rehearsing for a role in a play no one wanted to see. His downfall became my reminder that arrogance ages fast when it's exposed to light. The morale of my story isn't complicated. It's simple, like the truth usually is. Never mistake a quiet woman for a weak one, and never underestimate a woman who pays attention. Marcus believed my silence was submission, when really it was strategy. He thought his charm could erase suspicion, but charm doesn't stand up against receipts. In the end, he lost the very thing he cherished most, his reputation, while I gained something more lasting than revenge. I gained peace, self-respect, and the confidence that I can survive storms and come out shining brighter on the other side. Revenge felt sweet in the moment, but the real victory was building a life without fear, one where every choice is mine alone. Now I wake up with my head high, my heart steady, and my spirit whole. I live with freedom that tastes better than any expensive dinner Marcus once bragged about paying for. I spend my evenings listening to music that makes me dance barefoot in my living room, laughing at old shows, or simply sitting by the window with a cup of tea, knowing the quiet belongs to me. And whenever people ask me what I learned, I tell them this: life always keeps its receipts, and sooner or later, it cashes them in. Marcus thought he held the power, but in the end, all he held were lies. I walked away with dignity, proof, and peace. And those are things no one can ever take from me again. If this story moved you, please like, drop a comment, and subscribe. Your support means the world and keeps these stories alive.